We spoke a little bit about the dice game itself. I want to talk about one of the consequences of it, and that is the scene with Draupadi, the princess and wife to all of the Pandava brothers. Put aside all of the multiple marriage issues, but this is a very dramatic scene. When we speak about scenes that tug at our sense of empathy, that drag us into it, kind of, oh, how is this going to turn out? This is a very high-pitched drama moment. You can't help but, feel bad for her. Now, she can be a little haughty as a character. She is a princess, and she lets people know this. But in this one instance, you find yourself, feeling bad for her, very bad for her. What we're talking about here is a sexual assault. And she has been sold, gambled away, like she was nothing. How would that make anyone feel? Degraded, yeah. It's humiliating. The sequence is just horrifying. She is not in the hall when she is gambled away, and she is sent, or a messenger is sent to her to explain this to her. Now imagine, and here, it's another sort of complicated, nuanced scene where, she is a princess, the only wife of the best of the Pandavas. She has some status, some stature. But a messenger, a common little gopher, is sent to tell her, your husband gambled you away and you're a slave girl now. Come with me. That's something. She refuses that, and they send a slightly more powerful messenger to her, and it becomes much more menacing automatically. Come, my fine girl, you've been lost at dice and are nothing but a slave. We own you now. You'll have to learn to love the Kauravas and show us how you've made our cousins happy. What is that line doing? Yeah, it's threatening rape. Show us how you've made our cousins happy. Now, this is, I am interpreting this as threatening rape. You could interpret that as saying, well, no, maybe she's a fine conversationalist. And they're all going to sit down and, swap ideas or just chit-chat. Pleasant, sparkling conversations every evening. Maybe. But there is something quite menacing in it, regardless. And I would say that she has been reduced to a slave girl and now specifically targeted as a sexual object to reduce her from the status of princess to one of the most common, fundamental roles that this society values women to be. and that is sexual objects. There aren't a lot of women in this story in comparison. There are a few, a lot of characters. So when you do find one, it's good to lean in and just say, well, okay, you know, why? Why am I being shown this one? And is it a fully rounded character, or is it just another example of all women?
She's a character that has been affected by one of the main characters, so they kind of do have to show a little bit of light on how one character who's supposed to be the hero has it's like one of his consequences, or just an effect that he's put on another character.
Yeah. She is not given, I guess you could say, in this, her own story arc, so to speak. She is always just a function of one of the other characters' stories. In this case, it would be maybe her husband's. She is the unfortunate consequence of his actions. Yeah. Is it then surprising that she fights back against this? No. Why?
Nobody wants to be a slave or a slave.
Nobody wants to be a slave or a slave girl. Yes, you're right. This is, I would say, a universal thing. We can all feel a little outrage. We can all feel a little empathy. We can all maybe feel even a little threat, because the obvious question is, if this girl can go from being a princess to suddenly a slave like that, what could happen to me? Sudden twists of fate in an unknowable universe. Oh, crap. Could that happen to me too? That menace, I think, is important. And it sparks something I think universal, which is that horror of vulnerability. And again, we're seeing, this is the second messenger sent. This is a higher ranking person. This is one of the Kaurava brothers, I believe. And he just dismisses her value as a human being altogether. She's a princess of the 5 main Pandava brothers. This guy is just sort of like a hanger-on to the Kauravas, and he's coming in and he's saying, nah, to hell with you. You're nothing. And there is a specific, there's a specific cast to the attacks on her that pin her as an example of all women. Because yes, she is a princess, she is an exceptional, but here she's being, I think, coded as a kind of universal, and how the composers of this story, how the authorities behind it are seeing women, which as specifically defined by their gender. You can have men of all different stripes in here, you know, impulsive men, hot-headed men, cooler men, cerebral men, you know, big brawny men. But here, the woman, the female character, is very specifically drawn in gendered types. That is the entirety of her character, almost. Because what comes out, or what does she plead that she shouldn't be dragged into the assembly hall to be displayed? What does she say in argument of, no, I can't be brought there? she has her period. A specific signifier that this is a woman. This is a universally recognized woman. Nothing about her individuality here, nothing about her particular character, just woman, defined as someone who has a period. She whispered that it was her time of the month, when she should not be seen, when she was wearing a single garment, but he laughed lewdly. Let everybody see you have your period. Wear what you like, or come to us stark naked. Slave! You can't be so particular. Call on the gods until your voice is hoarse. Nara, Narayana, they won't rescue you. That's not just your individual personal husband did something stupid and we're going to punish you. That's zeroing in on her gender and her sexuality. The core biological definitions of women are being put up here, and we are told that that's nothing. And she is also significantly being called in as a sexual object during this function, which even the text suggests, you know, this is the time when she should not be seen. That is a cultural thing, yes.
It's not weird, but they usually it's like a collective group of women. They go to like a cave or a certain type of house, and they.
There are a number of cultures around the world throughout history that, you know, treat it as, okay, you just go deal with that out of sight, out of mind. There is a long tradition of that. Here, that social propriety is even being swept away. That traditional way of thinking that, okay, we just have to be gentle around that, is being swept away. That cultural imperative, that tradition of respect for something, a point of vulnerability, is being cast aside. More human innovations throwing aside traditional practices. Soon she was flung in front of the assembly, her long hair loose, her garment torn, disheveled and stained with blood. Every decent man lowered his eyes in shame, but none of them, not the elders and not her 5 husbands, uttered a word of protest. They were silenced, for to speak out would have been disrespectful to Dhritarashtra, and some of those present feared falling out with Duryodhana. Thrown out, her garment torn, stained with blood, her long hair loose. Nice little touch there. What's that? Why do they have to mention her long hair loose? It codes her again as a female. It codes her again as, I would say, sexual. Long hair is generally associated with sexuality, a kind of naturalness to it. And when it is loose, just flying around, yeah, that is coded as perhaps a sexual animal object. Think about all those like Hollywood images where they want to capture, you know, at the end of the movie, the young lovers are going to finally embrace, and there always seems to be a little breeze that blows up at the last minute and gets the actress's hair going crazy in the wind, and it looks so passionate. Hair is coded as sexual. So again, all these little flares telling you, hey, this is about women. This is about gender. This is about sexuality. There's a lot more going on here. And also you can't help but notice, the point that everybody feels bad and they're all lowering their eyes, a little ashamed at all of this, but nobody says it's wrong. Nobody says, oh, come on. Even her husbands, we are told, the story is poking that, saying, even her 5 husbands aren't ever saying, hey guys, let's reel this back in. We're getting out of control here. What is the effect of that? Yeah, but don't rely on modern sociology and stuff. That just objectifies this. What do you think about these 5 guys that are watching their wife get sexually assaulted, essentially? Since we are told not her 5 husbands are right there and they did not utter a word in protest, what do we think of them? Yeah.
It's like they know that they have lack of power, not much they can do to help in that scenario. Since technically, because of the gambling, they are essentially not morally, but essentially right because she was gambling and they lost.
Yeah. Maybe they accept that. Well, yeah, this is the cost of it. I might have a moral objection as an individual to what is going on here, but in the larger social contract, we all entered into this gambling agreement, and this is the consequence of that, and there's nothing we can do. We are human beings, but this is a much larger system of fate, and we are powerless to intervene. Another hand back there? Oh, okay. Yeah. But the fact that also when you kind of want a hero to step forth and, save the princess, you want her to be protected. Your empathy is being tugged at here. These great leaders do not. And you can make excuses for, well, they're respecting the rules of the game. And maybe it's a very American thing to want somebody to come in and, break the rules to do what's right. Gosh darn it. But it's troubling. And the text finds that vulnerability. And it just keeps opening up that wound and pouring salt in. So you just gotta wrestle with it. You just gotta figure, why wouldn't they interrupt? How could they just sit there and watch? Then Vikarna, one of the younger sons of Dhritarashtra. Younger sons. Interesting detail. Trivia? Do we need to know? He's got 100 kids, 100 boys. We don't know about the girls. Assumingly there are a couple of girls in there. You have 100 kids.
I think there's like 1 girl.
Yeah, that's right, actually, yeah. Very good. It's a busy lady. But younger sons, what does that tell us? It's not a just vague detail. What?
I believe is thing like the older the son, the more power they have, and then like the more older they have, younger means less.
We're dealing with primogeniture. The eldest son, the firstborn son, Duryodhana in this case, is the big guy, and the further you get down from that, it's seen as a degeneration, so that the baby of the family is he's nothing. So this younger is just sort of vaguely along that spectrum, and is also essentially weak or of no importance. But he raises what I think we would have to recognize as a pretty valid point here. It's deeply shameful for her to be dragged here. Yudhishthira was under the influence of an addiction. He had lost control of his own actions, so should not be seen as properly responsible. Furthermore, it was not his own idea, but Shakuni's to stake his wife, and this despite the fact that Yudhishthira is not her sole husband. In any case, it's clear that the Pandava could not lose his wife if he had lost himself, since slaves have no right to property. Draupadi is no slave, it stands to reason. There were sounds of approbation in the hall. What case is this guy making here? He's making a couple of good points. He's arguing logically, for one, whereas everybody else is sort of caught up in this this public stoning, if you will, where they're all gathered around the victim and sort of watching her get degraded. And let's face it, that's why we've been reading this passage. In sympathy with her, or out of, our own darkest impulses to see people punished. She has been kind of a haughty princess so far, and who doesn't like to see the high and mighty get dragged low? So it's implicating everybody. But here, this kid, the younger son, is saying, well, no, let's look at this like a lawyer would. She is no slave, and lays out a rationale for that. Lays out the rationale that she wasn't Yudhishthira's to gamble away anyway, because she is a shared wife. So he cannot gamble away that which is not his. This is legal theory. He is arguing like a lawyer, using logic and reason instead of that emotional basis that we as readers have been caught up with along the way. But this kid gets shut down. Karna answered him contemptuously. You notice none of the elders speaks for her. Only you green, impulsive youth, are swayed by sentiment. The fact remains, we clearly heard Yudhishthira stake all his possessions. That includes Draupadi. So a logical answer back. Even to strip her naked would be no sin, since she has joined herself to 5 husbands, flouting every law of decency, and therefore is undoubtedly a whore in the eyes of gods and men. Maybe it's just me, but when I first got to, and she married all 5 brothers, my head went to a dark space at first. Does that implicate me? I'm sure I'm alone in that. Is this text pointing at me? At this, the Pandavas removed their upper garments and flung them down. Dushana then grabbed at the loose end of Draupadi's robe and began to pull. Draupadi closed her eyes in silent concentration. Dushasana brayed with triumphant laughter as he twirled her round, unraveling yard upon yard of cloth, which pooled and pooled on the marble floor, more and more of it. His gleeful smile began to fade as minutes passed and more minutes, and the garment covered her as securely as before, though a stream of silk of a multicolored river shimmered and snaked around the assembly hall. Everyone cried out in utter wonder and glowered at the sons of Dhritarashtra. Dushasana gave up, angry and tired. We were told earlier that she was wearing a wrap, essentially, of a single piece of garment. And here somebody came and grabbed it and started to pull at it, spinning her around. And a single garment will tend to run out, leaving her there naked in front of everybody. But what happens instead? It just keeps going. It's a loaves and fishes moment in a Hindu context. It's a miracle, if you will, a kind of divine intervention, or perhaps just a simple mystery. There's no God mentioned here. But in that moment, it's so dramatic. And whether you're drawn from sympathy or prurience or darker impulses, you see this princess being methodically disrobed in front of everybody, one way or the other, by one emotion or the other. You're drawn in. What happens then? It's an unknown. Your instinctual emotional attachment to this moment has you on the edge of your seat, wanting to know how it turns out, wanting to know what comes next, like every good story. But in the end, it's only a mystery, and you have no idea, and you are forced to grapple with this and say, what? Huh? What happened? The text is pulling at you and then pushing you away. Again, ripping you from one side to the other, trying to figure out where you can land solidly. How can you understand what this world is, what this moment is, when all of your human instincts come up against a void, and you're left with nothing but wonder? Draupadi defends herself. Lords of the earth, where is honor in this hall? Where is Dharma? Time must be out of joint when such outrages can be enacted, unprovoked, unchallenged. I am the wife of great Yudhishthira, equal to him in rank. I am the daughter of King Draupadi and the friend of Krishna. I ask again for an answer to my question. Am I one or not? Am I a lowly slave or am I a queen in the distinguished line? You surely know the law. I will accept whatever you decide. That gets me. Now, there's, again, an awful lot going on there. She is arguing a legal question. She's saying, no, now wait a minute, do I have rights or am I just property? Am I a human being or am I nothing? Question.
Who is she talking to? She's talking to God?
She's talking to the assembly, everybody around her who has been telling her that she is nothing and that she should just shut up, and whether you're menstruating or not, you're here for one purpose. Well, the assembled lords, meaning the assembled aristocrats. But presumably the gods are listening.
Because at the same time, she got a few wishes, no? That me free and then my husband's free, and the third one was, I don't want to agree.
It develops that, yeah, they reach a human accommodation. She is right here, but that's, don't jump ahead. Right here, she is arguing, we need to decide this big question. Does a human being have any individual rights? And that's a major question to raise in a, as we suggested before, totalitarian society. She is being stripped of everything, literally. And is that right? And she wants to know, can you do that? Am I really nothing? And here again, she has been coded throughout as specifically female, always referenced in terms of her gender and her sexuality. So she is not just speaking as a character here. She is representative of women in general, I would argue, and saying, do we, as half the population of this earth, have any rights? This is a bold question to ask at any time, in any culture, but I would say especially in the ancient world, when largely the answer to that question is no. Women don't have rights.
She more mentions her honor, like she mentions the fact that she's, you know, a possible queen, that she's, you know, a daughter from a king. So she more mentions that, like, yeah, she mentions the king side of her, but she more mentions that she's royalty. So
Yeah, and what is your reaction to that?
I feel like she's just trying to like establish that she has authority in some kind of way.
Yeah.
Even though they don't see it as that, because they're just seeing her as, oh yeah, something like that. It doesn't matter. But for her, she's like, I have some kind of royal honor, just as you guys.
Have you ever sat online waiting for a table at a restaurant and the guy talking to the maitre d' in front of you pulls out the line, do you know who I am? My daddy owns half of this city, or something like that. And what is your general reaction to that guy doing that?
They're kind of an a-hole.
Yeah.
Advantage, so.
A-hole would be the politest way of describing that. And she's playing that card right there. Do you know who I am? But that is as a character. She is asserting that. Perhaps out of desperation. You know, you get told you're about to get gang raped in front of an audience of your family, and you might not always, you know, you might be grasping. You might try anything. But that's as the character. If you extrapolate it to the more abstract representation of her as woman, she's just as desperate, and she will try anything. Because again, if it can happen to her as a woman, what chance do ordinary women have for any sense of bodily autonomy, would be a polite way of phrasing it? Or if they have no rights at all, they're just an object. That exchange, I think, is extraordinary, because the story doesn't need to go to that pitch. It doesn't need to broaden out necessarily in order to get the plot progressing. We're all hooked by the plot, but now they're poking us with these finer philosophical and legalistic points. It's an odd little mixture, because, you know, this is high-pitched drama. This is the part of the movie where, you know, the bad guy and the good guy and the marginally good guy and the marginally bad guy are all sitting there pointing guns at one another, waiting to see who's going to blink first. This is high-pitched drama. And we want to know how this story comes out. Why do we suddenly have to be raising these law school hypotheticals in the middle of it? Well, because a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. The text has brought us to this pitch of excitement, even titillation, lusting after the resolution of this conflict, and then it jabs at us to remind us this is what we mean. You are subject to the same human weaknesses, the same frailties, the same lusts as everybody else. So don't think yourself so superior. Oh, everybody in this book, they're just awful. I would never behave that way. It's not letting you off the hook. Think about, like, again, modern culture, TV shows or something. Real Housewives of this, there, and everywhere. Everybody scoffs, like, oh, those people are terrible. Oh my God, what awful human beings. But you're watching, and you're dying for the next episode. Because they have you hooked to the same animalistic, lustful curiosities that you poo-poo in them. Oh, they're all so superficial and petty. But don't you feel good when they get dragged down a little?
There was the part that she was reading how they were like kind of hating on her for having 5 husbands.
Yeah.
But like it made me think about like how the fact that in certain cultures it's okay to, or it's acceptable to have 5 wives, but like nobody like looks down on you for that. It's like, oh.
The multiple marriage issue is complicated. And it is certainly something that is shared across cultures even to this day. More common is the multiple wives model around the world, which is what we know as polygamy. Here, multiple husbands is called polyandry. It is. It's sort of a mix of, it's Greek. Poly means many, and if you think about it, polygamy, GY, anytime you see GY, it means woman in Greek, gynecologist. And andry, AND, ANDR, is the same root word from that we get for android, meaning man. Andra means man in Greek. So polyandry means many men. And yeah, there is that aspect of this question that is, I don't have the answers about, how common this was in any particular culture at any time. Certainly, yeah, in that moment, in that drama, these guys are expressing disgust at that. And maybe they wouldn't feel so disgusted if it had been the other way around. If you argue it from the other side and say that, all of these people who are poo-pooing the idea of one woman with 5 husbands would probably be fine with having 5 wives to themselves. That is an open question. And yeah, that is one more aspect of that gender dynamic that I think it is thrown in there and you are reminded of it very explicitly in that moment. A lot of pages have passed from when the Pandava's mom comes up with this plan back in the tournament where Arjuna wins the tournament and the hand of Draupadi, and then announces that, our policy is that when one of you wins, you all win, and you share and share alike, which is an example of dynastic thinking and not dividing property and all of that stuff. But here there is a sense of the horror of that one woman being, again, coded as sexually loose.
Yeah, so they see her as being shared among the guys. But if it's like the if it's like a husband with multiple wives, it's more like, oh, he gets like he's receiving something from them, not he's being shared among them. It's more like,
Yeah, there's it's another example, yeah, of the sharing of property, essentially. Who has autonomy, who has an individual identity beyond their sexual function, is really what we're talking about there. And there, these issues are just always sort of flushed out there. It's very easy when you're reading to just sort of scan over, well, yeah, I know about that, I know about that. But the text is reminding you in these moments exactly what it wants you to consider. These things might be established, hundreds of pages back, but here it's just reminding you, yeah, she's got 5 husbands. What a slut. Because it wants that notion in the mix when you're considering it. And I would say that here, this is being very revolutionary. This is an example of revolting against authority, because it is raising all of these questions about the power or the relative power or right to power of women, who in this culture, and by this I mean world culture largely, have less power than men. And here the text is not explicitly saying that's wrong, but is just ginning up the conflict, raising the issue, forcing you to grapple with it from that position of uncertainty once again, from that position of, I don't know a right or wrong answer, but I need to come to some sort of understanding of the variables. And until I do that, I'm just a mindless drone. And God knows we have too many of those walking around. So here I would say the text is getting readers to question gender hierarchies, sexual identity, the interplay of sexuality and gender stereotypes and the hierarchies that come from it. Remember, she's always coded as sexual in this. But when she is standing up for herself, that is not inherently sexual. That is an individual demanding consideration for her essential identity that is beyond her role as a sexual function. And it is this conflict that, you're right, they do set up a resolution that trips off the rest of the story, the rest of the plot. The elements of the plot with the elements of the theme are always interwoven, and they never leave you behind for long. Here, it is the resolution of the plot that they come up with a compromise that, okay, you guys, we're not going to take Draupadi and make her our slave. You guys all have to go wandering into the wilderness for I think it's 13 years or something. 12 years, and then the last year they can come out of the wilderness, they can come out of the woods essentially, but they have to be in disguise. They can't tell anyone who they are. Interesting little callback to, do you know who I am? You are not allowed, once you come back into society, you are not allowed. And the Kauravas bet that they will never make it, they'll never survive. So making this the condition of them having back the throne, we're in. They're never going to do it. And of course, that sets up the remainder of the plot as it's going along, or the main thread of the plot as it goes along, as we follow the Pandavas going off into a kind of religious spiritual retreat, while the Kauravas and Duryodhana stew in their own worldly political concerns. So that melodramatic, soap opera-like plot is still churning along there, even as all of those thematic questions are being threaded around. Again, it's like we're there for the story. We're there for the plot. And it's a great story with lots of these dramatic scenes. But around them and interwoven through them is always stuff for consideration. Stuff that you can't just dismiss out of hand. This poem would not last several thousand years at this point if it was just a good story. There are lots of good stories out there. The ones that last tend to make you think about something. They tend to have a reason for existing. Maybe it's to justify totalitarianism. Maybe it's to question totalitarianism and celebrate individuality. Maybe it's some combination of both. But in all of it, it is churning up these questions that we're supposed to grapple with. We're supposed to notice that they're there and not just skim past them in the race to get to what happens next in the story. It's the little things that matter along the way. The individual plots, almost all interchangeable. The themes that get exhumed in the little conflicts, the little clashes, the little pokes and prods, like, why did it say that? Why bring up that? I knew that, but why is it reminding me right then, right there? What is the reason? That gives you the tools of being awake to the world around you and not just accepting what happens blindly. And if you can do that, you are better equipped to deal with a confusing world.